Well, Bev, I think what happened yesterday was that there was a great deal of advance in substance, but there was a blip on presentation. And by that, I mean that in substance, what NATO did was actually set out the path to Ukraine's accession to the bloc after after the defeat of the Russian invasion. And they did that by restating the commitment made in 2008, which was the first opportunity for Ukraine's candidacy for NATO. And then significantly, they waived something which is called the MAP. Now, this is part of a process normally in accession to NATO, which takes years to complete, but it was waived for Finland and Sweden, who, of course, are joining the bloc or have joined the bloc, uh, in Finland's case, within a year of declaring candidacy. And Ukraine will be on that fast track as well after Russia's defeat. The problem was the presentation, because what Ukraine, President Zelensky wanted was they wanted an explicit invitation in 2023 to join NATO. And there are some NATO countries that didn't want to use that language up front. And it gave the appearance of division yesterday when actually there's actually a quite deal of convergence in terms of what's happening. Why is Zelensky happier today? Because what you're getting today are the practical issues of military support for Ukraine's counteroffensive to liberate the east and the south of the country. And you're getting a series of commitments, including after Zelensky's meeting with the Australian leader, Mr. Albanese, for Bushmaster armored vehicles. Germany is delivering a huge package with tanks, with air defense. The Americans will announce their package later today in other countries as well. So we're back on track, as it were, to provide those, not security guarantees. That's a little bit too binding language, but that support for Ukraine's security in the sense of trying to finally defeat this Russian invasion after 17 months.
Yeah. Scott, let's ponder this for a moment. Of course, those rules about NATO offering membership to a country at war were put in place years ago in very different circumstances. All organisations need to reform and change if those circumstances change and there is a compelling reason. What prevents NATO from looking at that and looking at Ukraine as really being the front line of the defence against Russia right now?
Yeah, I think, Bev, you're referring probably to the Article 5 commitment, which is that NATO says, look, if one of our members is attacked, then everyone else has to come in and defend it. Now, if you were to do that with Ukraine in the middle of this Russian invasion, NATO has to go all in. There's no calibration of the support which is provided. And we know, for example, there's ongoing discussions about air power, about F-16 fighter jets, for example. So that's the first issue, is that you get no flexibility right now in terms of support. Secondly, for some countries, I think in particular the US and Germany, making that commitment too upfront would really sort of raise the stakes with the Russians in terms of what would be a direct NATO-Russia confrontation. And so they still want that one level of detachment. This is not first and foremost a fight between NATO and Russia. It's Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So we don't make this a formal NATO-Ukraine battle. At this point, we go to the formalities after Vladimir Putin finally goes to the negotiating table or is defeated.
But the fact that they don't bring NATO into the fold, although they are in a sort of de facto way, does that not prolong Putin's motivation for keeping this rumbling along for as long as he can?
That's Ukraine's argument. That's the argument the Zelensky government's making, which is if you leave, any space here, the Russians will try to exploit it as being, quote, uncertainty. They'll do it with their propaganda to say, oh, look, there's a division between the West and in Ukraine. They'll do it with an area of uncertainty, which says, at this point, you might not win. You might not win this. And Ukraine's saying, you need to be upfront, therefore, not about a formal membership during the invasion, but you need to be upfront about what this invitation entails. And we want a timeline to accession. But there's the rub. There is never a timeline to accede to NATO. Not even Finland and Sweden had that. There are conditions that you have to meet. And so NATO's response is meet the conditions, then you come in, and then we finally have that Eastern European security if Vladimir Putin is still in power and tries this again.
And therein lies a very intriguing question. Let's talk a bit about Putin. The very bizarre news this week that he had indeed met with the mutineer Prigozhin after he was supposed to have gone to Belarus. make sense of why Putin would sit down with someone who had, urged rebellion.
It does appear a bit curious. June 24th, Wagner Group advances on Moscow, is threatening to attack Russian armed forces. June 29th, 5 days later, after the rebellion is ended by a deal, Vladimir Putin sits down not only with Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner Group leader, he sits down with the Wagner Group commanders. The explanation? It is a carrot and stick strategy. Now, the stick is still being wielded with Prigozhin. He's still being trashed in the Russian state media. A really bad guy, how could he do this? Because you don't want Prigozhin to get back into a position of influence. But you need the carrot, because all those Wagner Group mercenaries, you want them to be part of your military, especially because Wagner controls a lot of minerals and resources in places like Africa. You go too hard on Prigozhin, you go too hard, like executing him, that would be bad, or even a show trial, and the Wagner Group fighters may not cooperate with you. And so that's the balancing act that Putin's still trying to accomplish, 3 weeks after the rebellion supposedly had ended with this deal that was never implemented.
Yeah, but it also shows, Scott, that, he's not completely in control of the narrative, Putin. I mean, if you look at the way he deals with some people believed to, be treasonous or not to be towing the line, they're dealt with very swiftly. Does this weaken Putin's position?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally it weakens it because it shows, in fact, that a group was able to carry out, if only for 36 hours, a rebellion to strike at the heart of the Russian state, to take over the southern military headquarters that oversees the Ukraine war. But here's the fundamental. Losers struggle to control narrative. And the reason why Yevgeny Prigozhin felt emboldened to try this on was because Russia is losing on the battlefront in Ukraine. So if Russia continues to lose in Ukraine, you'll have further repercussions domestically, and there's no way that Vladimir Putin can control that beyond what he's discussing with Mr. Prigozhin.
Yeah. Just so many fascinating twists and turns. Great to see you as always, Scott. Thanks.
Thank you, Bev.